Thank you very much. Is this volume good for all you guys in the back? I want to make sure you guys don't miss anything. Yes? Thumbs up. Higher? You guys need it higher in the back? All right, awesome. Okay, everyone, well, welcome. Obviously, big on the screen behind me is intermittent fasting, which is the topic for today. I'm assuming many of you have heard of this topic already, and how could you not have? I mean, it's kind of everywhere. It started out in sort of the health field almost predominantly, and now fitness people have really started to embrace it quite a bit. Have you guys seen this? And it's even kind of trickling over into strength and conditioning. Maybe some of you have had athletes kind of asking if they should be fasting. And I know when I first started hearing about this fasting stuff, I was like, what, are you nuts? Like, what is wrong with you? Why would you not eat for large portions of every day or week and think that's somehow conducive to athletic performance? But if my crystal ball is correct, within the next 5 years, this is going to be sort of taking on a life of its own. Kind of like how crazy people are over the paleo thing right now. Whether you like it or not, irrelevant, it's hot. Intermittent fasting, I think, is going to be the next thing in this area. So whether you love it or whether you hate it, I think it's extremely important to understand it, because you don't want your athletes and clients to know more about it than you do, and you certainly don't want to dismiss it as just stupid because you're kind of uninformed about it. Because there's a lot of information on it nowadays. And I mean, you can even take this approach. I think I've heard it said that you should keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So whether you love or hate intermittent fasting, I think it's a wise move to understand it. So before actually getting into any of the science or any of that kind of stuff, which quite frankly can get boring, I want to actually share a little bit about my story and my experience coming to experiment with intermittent fasting. And it kind of all started, I'd say, about 3 years ago. And it was before my wife and I had our first daughter. And I had done, I think, that year 30 speaking engagements or something like that. So I was kind of jockeying all over North America and Europe and Canada. And the truth is, jet lag was just kicking my ass, totally. I felt like crap. I felt like I could never catch up from the last trip. And so I started researching ways to combat jet lag, if you can believe it. And what I found was the anti-jet lag diet. Sounds kind of crazy, like one of these promises for like the tired business travelers, like how they'll believe anything. They're so sleepy, they've got no filter, right? So anyway, this Dr. Charles Ehret had come up with this protocol, and I'll share it with you just real quickly. So basically, there's this sort of combination of fasting and feasting that you would do leading up to, travel that crosses several time zones. So there would be these feast days on day 1 and day 3 from your travel, working backwards. And then you would have like high protein, big breakfast, high protein, big lunch, and then a high carb dinner. And then on the in-between days, you'd eat basically nothing, okay? And then on your travel day, you would just have a high-protein feast, and then when you land in your location, preferably at breakfast, and then just get back to normal eating, okay? So, does it work is the question. Because that sounds like a lot of stuff to do. Like, I have to actually start planning for my trip 4 days in advance nutritionally. I don't know, it didn't sound that awesome to me. But they actually published a study in 2002 in military medicine with National Guardsmen. So what they did was they flew from the US to Korea and Korea back to the US. And there were these dramatic reductions in symptoms that come from jet lag. You can see 7.5 times less when going from the US to Korea, and like 16 times going in the opposite direction. So that's pretty huge. So actually a lot of military will use these types of protocols when they do these big trips. Now, for me, it was compelling enough to want to try it, but the truth is, I totally chickened out. I was like, it means not eating for 2 days of the week. I'm not sure I'm down with that. So I was not interested at all, okay? So I just never did it. And then I found this other protocol, the anti-jet lag fast, okay? So this is a modified protocol. So with this one, it's just a day of travel intervention. So I was like, all right, cool, this isn't 4 days, it's just the day that I'm traveling. So you would eat a normal breakfast and lunch, and theoretically in this scenario, you're traveling in the evening time, like I did coming here, down to Vegas from Toronto. And you would fast before and especially during the flight. You drink lots of water. Like, all this fasting has nothing to do with water. This isn't like a Spartan ethic, like don't open your mouth for these hours, right? No, drink loads of water and those types of things, coffee, green tea, whatever you like. You just don't eat any caloric foods. And then what you do when you get to the new location, you eat soon after arriving, close to local mealtime as possible. Let's say you're doing a flight from, let's say, the US to the UK. This would be perfect. You kind of fly through the evening, go to sleep when you get there, you don't eat. So you might be fasting, as I have up here, 14 hours during this day, sometimes as much as 24, okay? So I thought, you know what, I could probably try this. But I still chickened out. I never went for it, right? So the question is, how did I get to what I actually practice today, which I'm going to show you right now? This is my unpublished travel diet, and it's actually my everyday diet, to be honest. So typically I do about 3 strength training workouts in a week, and I'll talk about my goals and stuff like that in a few minutes because I have some cool experiments I want to share with you. But just bear with me for now and just assume that I know what I'm talking about for a minute, all right? So I do 3 strength training days a week, and my first meal usually comes around 3 or 4 p.m. I don't eat anything before that. And this is most days of the week. Okay? So I'll train right before that meal comes, and I'll eat a high protein, high carb meal as my follow-up, just like most people would do with a post-exercise nutrition meal, right? You'd want to load in some amino acids and some carbohydrates, recovery. Right? So that's what I would do. I just would eat nothing before. And then I would have dinner, just another high protein, high carbohydrate meal, and I'd usually have just those 2 meals. And then on the days in between, and I'll call these conditioning days, which is what I usually do. I run track and field at the master's level, so these may be track workouts, they may be just conditioning workouts. And I kind of do the same thing, but instead of high protein, high carb meals, they're high protein, high fat meals. So I'm basically cycling carbohydrates. Makes sense. And then on the last day, which is day 7, will be an off day. It'll be similar to my conditioning days, okay? And then you might have the question, like, what if you're hungry in between? I might have a snack somewhere in there. But generally, I'm fasting from my dinner meal, which might be around 8 or 9, something like that, until 2 or 3 the next day. And I do that most days. So the question is, how the heck did I get to here from not even being able or willing to try a 1-day travel fast? Well, I want to share that with you as we go on today. I'll share with you why. I'll share with you the experiments that I did and what I believe about all of this fasting thing. Now, usually when I start sharing some of the protocols, this type of thing comes up. Well, all right, wait a second, all right? Whatever happened to the whole eating small meals frequently throughout the day? For almost every single person in this room, much of your career has been dominated by that advice, yes or no? Eat small meals frequently throughout the day. What does it do? It speeds up your metabolism. That's not really true. Oh, but it lowers stress hormones. No, that's not really true either. We thought it was based on some preliminary research. And if any of you are thinking, this guy's totally nuts, I have to leave right now because he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, just go check out the ISSN's position paper on feeding frequency. Published research, guys. I was a co-author of it along with most of the directors of the ISSN. And when we reviewed the research, many of them are here actually, many of them are speaking, we found that none of that was true. Now, it's not to say more meals, smaller, throughout the day is bad. It's just that the things that we're telling our clients that it's good for are wrong, okay? So things like muscle loss, low blood sugar, high cortisol, low performance, irritability, nutrient deficiency, fatigue, road rage. You know how hungry I get when I don't eat? Those types of things are all the objections you hear to people trying to fast or people who think about the idea of fasting. Some of you probably feel this now, okay? There's no way I would ever try this. Well, just bear with me. I'm not going to try and convince you to try it at all. But I just want you guys to listen to the idea that there may be another way of doing nutrition versus just the small meals frequently grazing throughout the day, okay? So that's all I need you to commit to. I'll just listen to this guy, all right? We'll see what he has to say. Now, my segue into this type of fasting that I'm talking about here was actually what I call the trial fast, okay? So after reading all about this jet lag stuff and being really intrigued from a very functional perspective, I wanted to feel less crappy when I arrived on the West Coast or in Europe. I started reading more about fasting, right? It always happens when your attention is tuned into something, you start paying attention more to that thing. And so I was reading these websites that were they were championing the idea of fasting for fat loss, for health benefits, for muscle gain in some cases. And at first I was like, they're totally crazy. You know, these people on the internet, you know, they're nuts. They have no idea what they're talking about, right? And the truth is, for most of my career, I've built an entire career, the last 20 years, telling people to eat small meals frequently throughout the day. So it wasn't exactly resonant with the philosophy that I had seen help thousands and thousands of people. So it's super easy to dismiss things under those conditions, right? Bunch of internet weirdos talking about it, and it's the opposite of what I've always done, so it's got to be wrong. But you got to admit, when you go to, anyone ever read any of the fasting websites? Yes? Anyone? I mean, people are vocal advocates for this. And they post pictures and they say it changed their lives, and you're like, okay, maybe there's something here. But I wasn't ready to commit whole hog to this whole fasting thing. So I decided what I would do is what we actually recommend to our coaching clients. So I run a company called Precision Nutrition, and we have a program called Lean Eating Coaching, okay? And for the last 5 years, we've coached 25,000 people online through this program. We have the world's largest database for fitness, weight loss, coaching in the entire world. And one of the habits or exercises that we ask our clients to do at some point in the program is to fast for a full day. Now, why do we do that? Well, there's a whole bunch of benefits that come from that. Teaching you the difference between physiological and psychological hunger, and I'll share a few more benefits in a minute. But we have been recommending this, and I figured, well, I ought to try it myself, right? But again, I just had this like lifelong fear of losing muscle and all these problems people always told me if I skipped a single meal. And I was going to skip like 6 to do this, all right? So I tried my trial fast. So here's what it looked like. I usually would do them on Sundays because that's kind of like more of a chill out day around our family's house. And so the day before fasting, I would eat like my normal breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then I'd have a snack around 10 p.m., and it would just be protein, veggies, and some water, okay? And then I would simply not eat any food until 10 p.m. the next day. So I'd go to sleep, wake up, and not have food. Now for my first fast, again, I was super paranoid, okay? So I was like, well, I have to concoct nutrient-rich beverages that are calorie-free that I can drink so that I'm not going to lose muscle and get sick from this day of fasting. So I put together like a greens drink, something like Greens Plus, and a big jug of water, and I would have green tea because maybe the caffeine would help me mobilize fats, and so I wouldn't be hypoglycemic. A little science is a dangerous thing, you know? And then I have branched-chain amino acids so that I wasn't like losing muscle at an alarming rate. And then I would do that during all my meal times, and then I had these great drinks, and I could still not eat food, but I'd be safe, okay? This is like wearing my nutritional seatbelt. So that was my first fast. Now, I still do this periodically, a 24-hour fast, but I actually just drink water. I'm way more chill about this whole thing because I realize none of the boogeyman stuff happens, okay? With a single day of fasting, every single person in this room has plenty of meals on them, okay? So if you're metabolically flexible, you will just eat the food that's already on your body. You don't have to put it in your mouth. You just eat this stuff wherever it may be, okay? So that was my first foray, and it actually taught me some things that I never expected to learn from it. The first one, and probably the most powerful one, is something that our industry could learn a bit about. Hunger is not an emergency. Do you guys know what I mean when I say that? Do you ever feel that way? If you're on an every 3 hours eating schedule, What happens at about 2 hours and 55 minutes when a meal is not in sight? You freak the hell out, don't you? Oh my God, I got like 5 minutes until mealtime. I'm gonna get totally hypoglycemic, and I might even pass out. My workout's totally ruined for later. And you go down this stupid chain of mental thoughts, none of which is true, but you think hunger is an emergency. Feeling hunger is a problem to a lot of people in fitness. And that's just a mental construct. The fact of the matter is hunger is not an emergency. I'll show you a kind of funny graph in a few minutes illustrating this. The next thing, physical isn't the same as psychological hunger. When you don't eat for 24 hours, I've actually extended this out and tried different lengths of fasting. I've gone out to like 72 hours before. You get to know what real hunger feels like. And it's different than what you feel if you've gone about 4 hours without a meal. I'm so starving right now. No, you're not. You're just a little bit hungry and uncomfortable. It's not an emergency. So you learn the difference between the feelings, and I think it's critical. In fact, if you want to have and maintain a lean body for life, you have to know what hunger feels like, and you have to not freak out when you feel it. So that's why we teach it to our clients. Other things that came up that may not resonate with you guys at all, but they did for me, was eating is a privilege. We actually have this privilege to have access to food whenever we want it. It's not universal in the world. So we have this awesome privilege and responsibility to feed ourselves healthy things. And I did not know that this would be a consequence of not eating. I thought I'd learn that more from just eating healthy stuff more often, but not eating actually taught me that it's a privilege and a responsibility to choose good things when we do actually get the food. And the last thing, and this was really interesting to me, food marketing is way more powerful than any of us know. We know that like when we try and help our clients eat better, we feel like the food marketers and the big companies are kind of pulling the strings, right? They're like little marionettes, like, I smell pizza. Oh, look at that shiny package, right? We kind of think that, but when you fast, it's amazing how far away from food you can smell that food. Like, your senses become heightened, and then you're like, oh my God, they pump food smell out everywhere to make us want to eat more. And food adds. When you're well fed, you don't really notice them as much, but when you do 1 day of fasting, you're like, you cannot turn anywhere and not see a food ad. It's crazy. So I thought this was fantastic. So I did this one fast. And if you guys get nothing else from this talk, you might consider whether this would be beneficial to you at all. Just pick 1 day. Maybe it's on if you're worried about muscle loss and training and all that, maybe it's on a week you haven't trained, like you've taken a back off week. And just try not eating for that day, but set yourself up for success, okay? And just see what it's like to fast one time. You never have to do it again. You don't have to commit to a lifestyle of intermittent fasting. You just go one time without eating for, let's say, 24 hours and see what happens. It was pretty profound for me. So I did that, and then I started reading more of this research because, again, I felt like this was a legitimate trend that wasn't about to go away, and that whether I liked it or not, I had to understand it. And if you dig into the research, you find some amazing looking things, okay? Here are just some of the benefits in terms of reduction. So reduced blood lipids. So we look at things like triglycerides and LDLs. You look at blood pressure, and we think that's a function of changes in the parasympathetic and sympathetic balance. You look at reductions in inflammation. So there's a whole bunch of markers up here. Some of you may be familiar with C-reactive protein, interleukin-6. There's a whole bunch of things you can measure to look at inflammation. And so all these markers have been looked at, and they all go down when you practice some form of fasting. Oxidative stress. And you can look at that through protein and lipid and DNA markers of damage. And there's even some data suggesting a decreased risk of cancer. So you're like, wow, this seems pretty impressive. The list just keeps going on. Some things increase. So cell turnover and repair. Some of you may be familiar with the idea of autophagocytosis, this idea that we will consume and digest old tissues, I'm simplifying it, but of our body so that we can turn over tissues and make new ones, okay? Presumably more functionally adapted. We all know this in the strength and conditioning world. That's why we know muscle damage occurs, and that breaks down tissues and helps them become more functional for what you've done for the next session, right? So we think this happens more frequently with some form of fasting. Fat burning, and we think that happens as a function of greater fatty acid oxidation later in the day. Really, that's just a fancy way of saying eating the food that's already on your body. Growth hormone increases very markedly later into fasts, something like several 100% greater into a fast. And then metabolic rate. Now wait a second, this is the opposite of what we've all been taught to think, isn't it? Eat small meals frequently throughout the day and your metabolism goes up. But what we actually find in practice is as this fast extends out, through increases in epinephrine and norepinephrine, metabolic rate actually increases, which is interesting. And then we see some other things, improved appetite control through some specific hormones. Now I'll say this isn't universal. Some of these responses are individual, and I found people who have worse appetite control when they fast. Okay? So for some people, I think small frequent meals is probably the best way to control appetite, but that's not for everyone. I've met loads of clients whose small frequent meals makes them food obsessed, and they eat way too much under those conditions, and fasting has corrected that for them. Blood sugar control, again, we think you're going to get all hypoglycemic, but the fact of the matter is, just even one fast, 24 hours, done infrequently, helps you become more metabolically flexible, which means that under any condition necessary, you can tap into the stored energy that you have. When we're metabolically inflexible, like obese individuals, we're overfed, but our tissues are starving, right? We can't use what's on us, right? But when we're metabolically flexible, we can use what's on us. And when we are, we don't get things like hypoglycemia very often because we regulate this extremely well. That's the ideal for every person who's into fitness and training and even high performance. It's being metabolically flexible. In fact, one group this is really important in is the military, okay? So they have a lot of periods of either food insufficiency or sort of questionable access to food, right? So in them, it's awesome to be metabolically flexible. If you got food to eat, you can eat it. If you don't, you burn what's on you. It's great training for military. Things like cardiovascular function are improved. There's studies on ischemic injury to the heart is improved outcomes with fasting. Even some stuff around chemotherapy. They're showing that higher doses, you can tolerate higher doses of chemotherapy more frequently when doing intermittent fasting. And then there's some really interesting stuff about neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. So our brains change over time, okay? Now, here's the big question, okay? Because I don't want to come off as a big fasting proponent. I do it, but 95% of my clients do not do it, okay? I'll tell you why at the end. Nevertheless, let's be really objective about the research. We're not sure if these benefits come from the reduction in calorie intake that comes when you fast or the fasting itself. So let's say we take an example week, okay? And you practice fasting for that week, a portion of every day. You'll probably end up eating fewer calories than you would have during a trial week where you weren't fasting. Yes? I mean, 3/4 of the day I'm not going to eat. So I'll probably eat less. So is it the eating less or is it the fasting that makes a difference? Right? Because maybe we could just tell people to have a smaller portion with each meal and they get the same benefits. Maybe we could tell them to exercise and it creates a negative energy balance and they get some of the same benefits, right? That's the big question. And we don't know the answer to that 100% yet. The other big question is who have the studies been done in? And most of them have been done in these little critters, okay? Now, if you look at, in a laboratory setting, the standard rat chow, okay? It's what it's called. What rats are fed for their normal diet. Has anyone ever been involved in animal research at all? Yeah. What do they get? They get these crappy little rat pellets. That's what they eat, okay? It's like the very worst dog food you could possibly find and give that to your dog, all right? So their normal diet is like a pellet of nutrients. It's not like healthy food, and it's not like a bounty of fruits and vegetables and healthy things. So when you give rats this little pellet of chemical crap, or you fast them, they do better with fasting. I sometimes wonder if it isn't just the reduction of all the chemical crap that they get in their little pellet that helps them out. So again, when we look at the fasting research, people who are big proponents of fasting will say, well, look at all this data. I mean, it's very compelling, isn't it? Well, we have to question some of it, okay? Now, there is a rich body of evidence in humans, but it's not well controlled, okay? You guys are familiar with the fasting that happens during Ramadan, yes? And so there have been tons of studies on fasting done in that group of individuals. And so there is some good evidence, but we have to be a little bit cautious and skeptical of it. We just have to ask the question, is it less calories or is it fasting itself? Because I think the answer is important in terms of what we might recommend. Okay, so if you dig into the fasting literature, you'll find about 5 or 6 different types of fasting protocols you can follow. One, and this is the most researched, it's called alternate day fasting, and this sounds like kind of horrible to me, all right? So what you do is you fast for 36 hours, and you feed within a 12-hour window, and you just presumably repeat for life, all right? So let's say it's Monday, I wake up at 7 a.m., I just eat during my normal eating schedule, and then I stop eating at dinner, and then I just fast until I wake up on Wednesday. So Tuesday is just like a no-food zone, all right? So that's alternate day fasting, where you just eat food every other day. In most of the studies, you get to eat whatever the heck you want on those every other days, and people still lose weight and see health improvements to some extent. There's another type of fasting that's called Eat, Stop, Eat. It's just a book that's been published around the idea, where you just do a full day fast, kind of like my trial fast, and you just do it like 1 to 2 days a week. So you might fast on Sundays or Wednesdays and Sundays, and then the rest of the days you just eat what you were going to eat, okay? So that's another example protocol. One, and it's not technically fasting, but it's close enough, this one kind of has had some popularity in the kettlebell community, is the warrior diet. Okay, so where you fast for like 20 hours each day and you eat within a 4-hour window. Okay, so for most people, they just eat at night, right? So if they work during the day, they get up, no breakfast, go to work, come home at night, maybe train first, and then just eat with their family a big dinner. So that's another protocol. There's one that was sort of popularized on the web called Lean Gains, and it's kind of close to what I've been doing, where you actually will fast for 16 hours a day and eat within an 8-hour feeding window. So basically, for a lot of people, that means fasting until lunch every day, and then eating your meals between that time and bedtime. And then some people who are really into, let's say, like the ancestral type of movement will do random meal skipping, right? They say, well, in our ancestral times, stuff was random, right? And like they're just assuming that, of course, because I don't know if anyone was around back then to know. But they're like, sometimes you had to run for the animal you were going to kill, and other times you didn't run very much. You just picked berries. And just pulling stuff out their butt, But nevertheless, they just think things happen randomly. So maybe you just skip a meal randomly. Sometimes you had food access, and sometimes you don't, right? So sometimes you skip a meal, maybe it's a dinner, maybe it's a breakfast. Now I like to put all this in context because I know whenever I talk about this stuff, people want to form an oppositional position if they don't believe in this or they have lots of questions. So they do the mental equivalent of this guy. Arms crossed, yeah, well, I'd never try this anyway, so go sell your crap to someone else, right? But here, let's just look at, actually, I want to show you a graph. I think it's coming up in a second. Now, I'm going to actually show this to you. Did we skip it? No, maybe it's coming up in a minute. Okay, let me change the stage then. So what I decided to do at this point was actually just try all this out on myself. Now, people who've kind of followed my work and the work of precision nutrition over the years know that I am sort of the ultimate guinea pig for everything that comes out. I'm like a lifelong self-experimenter. I try everything. Right now, I have like a portable metabolic cart at home. You guys have seen these, so you can measure gas exchange and stuff. So I'm doing this crazy experiment where I work out either once a day and I do 20 sets, 5 times a day and do 4 sets each time, or 20 times a day and do 1 set each time. And I swallow this like thermostat pill. It measures core temperature, and I wear a portable gas mask all day so I'm looking at some cool stuff. Like my family lives with this, okay? Like my 3-year-old daughter comes in the room and she's like, oh, Daddy's at it again. Can I get a kiss, Daddy? Not today, honey. I have my gas exchange mask on. So when it came to fasting, I wanted to try this stuff out. Now, I had some specific goals, and you ought to know them because that, of course, informs your decision-making whenever you choose training and diet. So first of all, I wanted to try something new and different, right? For honestly 20 years, I've been eating small meals frequently throughout the day, and it's been totally fine. I'll show you my before pictures. They're nothing to be embarrassed about. I wanted to lose 20 pounds, though, also. And it wasn't because I had like 20 pounds of body fat that desperately needed to be losing. It was because I had a new goal. My 40th birthday was coming up, and it's kind of odd the same time this all happened, but I ran track and field as a sprinter in high school. And I ran into the guys who I ran at the Penn Relays with, and anyone who knows track knows it's kind of a big international track meet. So I ran with these guys in high school like 20 years prior at the Penn Relays, and we were decent. So I ran into these guys, and literally all of them are still in shape, and they still do track workouts once in a while, which is like extremely rare. So we were like, wouldn't it be awesome and nostalgic and kind of goofy, like this is like the athlete's midlife crisis, to go back and run at the Penn Relays once we're all in our 40s. So that was our goal, right? We were training for the Penn Relays. So I was too big. I needed to lose a bit of body fat and train for this particular event. So that was part of my goals. I wanted to feel good while dieting. I had competed in bodybuilding many times when I was younger. And I never felt good when I was dieting. Has anyone ever dieted for a fitness, figure, bodybuilding show? Sucks, totally sucks, right? I mean, you can do it for 16 weeks, but at the end of it, you gain like 20 pounds in 2 days because you can't continue eating like that. You just blow it up afterwards, right? So it's not sustainable. But I wondered if doing this fasting thing could help me get lean similarly, but in a sustainable way. I don't want to spoil the story, but I've been doing this for like 3 years now. So it's fairly sustainable, and I've maintained my weight within 2 pounds of what I achieved having gone through this, which is cool. And of course, I wanted to stay healthy through the process, so I did blood work. So month 1, I just did 1 full day fast a week. What I described earlier is just what I did every Sunday, and that was it. Incidentally, for you guys taking notes, you don't have to scribble frantically. I've got something really cool that I want to give you guys at the end of this, all right? So you'll get this talk and a whole bunch more awesome stuff, all right? So you guys can just listen. Month 2, I just repeated the same thing because it was working. And here's actually my results. So during the first month, I went from 190 to 178 pounds. And I kind of stalled around there. So I kind of just, with the 1 day a week fast, stalled around 178. I just had this premonition that being around 170 was my best racing weight. So then I went to 2 full day fasts a week. And I quickly dropped, like within the first few days, to 171. And while that seemed like a good idea on the scale, it was awful. It was way too few calories a week. I was constantly obsessed about food. I remember like my daughter has it was like the Dairy Queen heyday, right? Because I'd be like taking her to Dairy Queen all the time because when I got to eat the junk food, I was all about it, right? She's like, Daddy, whatever happened to those days? Oh, Daddy's eating again. So I switched it up. Month 4, I switched to the shorter fasts, but done every day. And that actually initially shot my weight back up to 175, and it was all lean mass. And I was using ultrasound, an ultrasound device to look at my body composition throughout. I measured it weekly. So I was pretty clear what was happening in terms of body comp. And it was all lean mass, but it wasn't the direction I wanted to go. So I tried the 16-8 fast with a full day fast, and that was okay. Then I tried with 2 24 fasts, That was a nightmare again. So I started to find this way of titrating the dose, like how much fasting I could do in a week while getting towards my goals without going overboard and turning into an absolute crazy person. Because that's what happens, right? When you're too underfed, you're just getting these like feeding signals, right? And speaking of rodents, which we looked at earlier, there's this very interesting phenomenon that happens when you starve rodents or even just do fasting with them. They engage in what's called food-seeking behavior. So what happens is, instead of just chilling out, right? So you got these rats, they're in a cage, right? They're in a laboratory. Instead of just chilling out, they actually get on the little hamster wheel all night and just run. And what it is they're trying to find food. They just don't really realize they're not going to find it on that wheel. So it's an interesting phenomenon. They exercise like crazy when you go to cut their calories back. So that's kind of what happens to us too. We start doing really crazy food-seeking behaviors, the equivalent of that for human adults. So for me, the two friendliest fasts, and this won't be the same case for everybody, were the 1 full day a week fast, which is kind of easy to do. The first time you do it, you'll be miserable. You'll look up my address on Google. You'll go on Google Earth. You'll be like, how can I do a surgical strike for his house without taking out his kids? But the second one is like way easier. And then after your third or fourth, it's nothing, really nothing. People don't even notice, you barely even notice. It takes little practice. The 16-8 thing, that one worked really well too. And the truth is, I think that's probably the most physique friendly of all the different fasts. So if you consider fasting, or if any of your clients consider fasting, you have to think about their goals as well. 16-8 is probably the most physique friendly, but it might not fit into their lifestyle at all. People who have bigger health issues, let's say it's someone who's very obese, they might need something even a little more extreme than this, and they may benefit from it because once they become metabolically flexible, they'll just be burning meals like crazy. So just a quick before and after. Right? So this was my 6 months of experimentation. My before pictures are on the top and my after pictures are on the bottom. So, I was measured with the ultrasound, whether this is true or not, body fat numbers or whatever, but around 10 to 11% in the top photos, and I measured out at 4% in the bottom photos. Again, whether that's true or not, who cares? It's clear that I got leaner and I actually accomplished my goals. And then at the end of that season, I wasn't even intending on running, but I actually ran at the Canadian National Championships and did pretty well in the indoor season. So it was cool. I kind of accomplished my goals, both physique-wise and in terms of performance, right? Because that's the big question. This is all great, but how do you perform when you're not eating sometimes? Well, in strength and power sports, not too bad. If it was endurance-oriented, I'd probably have made a few tweaks. Now, the next question that often comes up is, what about muscle gain? Like, isn't this just for people who want to lose fat? So we actually did this other experiment. How many people have seen our bigger, smaller, bigger project? Anybody? A few of you. Oh, that's actually cool. All right, so Nate works with us, and Nate had this interesting goal. He's a black belt in Taekwondo, and he's been a big fan of mixed martial arts. And so he always was interested in how like MMA fighters might go through a camp and gain a bunch of muscle and then cut it all within the 5 days leading up to a fight and then put it all back within 24 hours. So this was our objective when we set out. So in 4 weeks, we're going to simulate a camp and he's going to gain 20 pounds of lean mass. And then what we're going to do, in 5 days, lose it all. And then in 24 hours, gain it all back. Now, for anyone who hasn't been around wrestling or MMA, this seems totally absurd. But if you have been around those sports, you know they sometimes do way bigger swings than that. Some athletes doing 30, 35 pounds, okay? So we were going to try this experiment, but we were actually going to use fasting during the experiment. Now, I'm just going to talk about the fasting part. And if you guys want to see the rest, we've published everything online, and I'll actually send that to you guys. I'll tell you how you can get it. But you can actually follow through Nate's whole journey of gaining, losing, gaining weight, complete with photos, all the protocols. It's pretty cool. So what we just did with him was he had these 4 strength training days a week, which were high calorie and high carb days. he had these conditioning days each week, 2 of them, where he had just sort of moderate meals, so it was calorie and carb cycling. And then on Sundays, he just fasted. He had green tea, water. He was worried about the muscle thing too, and we only had 4 weeks to gain 20 pounds of lean mass, so he had a couple branched-chain amino acids and greens a couple times during the day. So how did that work out for him? Well, we used that once a week fasting, and this was after 4 weeks. So he went from 170 to 190 pounds, obviously gained next to no body fat, mostly lean mass, and part 1 of the mission was accomplished. So it was kind of an interesting thing. Now here's my big cautionary tale, okay? I'm looking around the room, and there's actually a healthy percentage of women in the room, which is awesome for a strength and conditioning conference. It may not work the same way in women, okay? Now, cautionary tale number 1. When you go on all the intermittent fasting websites on the internet that most champion this way of eating, I have a secret for you. All of the people, well, not all, 90% of the people who were going, yeah, fasting rocks, high five, are young dudes, okay? They are young guys who are either in college, just out of college, probably not married, probably don't have any children, probably don't have ovaries. There are some differences between people in different stages of their lives, and while fasting seems to work extremely well for young dudes, we've tried this out on a lot of people. About 80% of guys do extremely well with some form of fasting. They lose a lot of body fat, they feel really good on it. Only about 25% of women do. Why? It just makes sense. Women are much more sensitive to energy balance from a hormonal, metabolic perspective, right? I mean, you see it in female athletes quite often, right? You see things like loss of menstruation. Why is that? Because when you slip into a negative energy balance or you're controlling calories too strictly, you get a sort of either nutrition deficiency or you're just in too negative of a balance. So when I see a lot of women trying fasting on their own, I'm a little bit scared for them. Because when they do the metabolic damage that may be inevitable for about 80% of them, without any help, it's a long road to recovery. And I don't say this to scare you guys. What I do say it for is to let you know that it's probably not a good idea to just try it by yourself. You probably need someone helping. It's like first day of the gym, you could probably use a spotter, all right? So Aaron works with us as well. Now, unlike Nate's story and my story, Aaron tried a bunch of different types of fasting for several months. In the first couple of weeks, she started losing weight. So she was like, yeah. Now, Aaron was in the same boat as me. She's coming up on 40 years of age, and she wanted to set some athletic goals, and she's a pretty athletic person. And so she was like, yes, I'm on track. This is awesome. High five, JB, it's totally working, right? And I'm like, okay, high five. But I'm like quietly like, yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on you, though. And then all of a sudden, she started gaining weight. Nothing really changed in her diet. Nothing really changed in her training. Maybe subtle things. But she's like 6 pounds heavier, 8 pounds heavier than when she started. And she's trying to fast longer now. She's like, oh, well, maybe if I go 20 hours. You guys get where this is going, right? It's not a good scenario. And it happens to so many women. And then what happens is, instead of going online and talking about it, they hide because they feel like they did it wrong. Like, I screwed it up somehow, so I'm not going to tell anyone. Besides, all those young dudes would eat them alive on those forums anyway, right? So they just hide. So we never hear the stories about the women failing on fasting. And then the ones who did succeed, the 20%, are like, I don't know what you crazy chicks are talking about, but it was awesome for me, right? So anyway, that's one cautionary tale. So I only have a few minutes left. So I want to do a quick summary. First of all, this is the take-home message. Fasting is an option. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But it is a legitimate option for certain types of people. So too is frequent eating. So who might it be for? Well, in my experience, people who have a history of monitoring calories and food just basically they've eaten well for years, are probably safest to try this. For people who haven't, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Because when they are super hungry at the end of a fasting day, and they have no prior history of making good food decisions, even when they're not starving, it's not going to go well. They're going to make the worst possible choices, okay? So I really like people to practice the art of making good choices frequently in the beginning, not just have one big, huge meal at the end of each day. Experienced exercisers it helps with as well, because exercise, I think, is a critical component. Now, this one isn't make or break, but people who are single or have no children, all right? It's a little bit easier, first of all, because if you have young children, it's another stressor in your life, and so is fasting, okay? So you want to make sure you're not fasting and doing this big metabolic, stressful intervention when you have loads of other stress in your life. Also, you got to think about your family in this mix. Like, how is this going to sync up with meal times at home? You're just going to be like, oh, daddy doesn't eat with the family anymore. Awesome dad, dad of the year. An extremely supportive partner is helpful if they're not doing it as well. Flexible job and lifestyle. Boss isn't going to be like, oh, you're fasting this week. Cool. Get the free pass. Like I said, low lifestyle stress, and obviously the athletic look. I mean, if you're trying to gain 50 pounds of muscle in the next 2 years, this is probably not the way you're going to go about it. Who maybe it is for? I don't know what happened there, I think. Oh, there we go. Who it's probably not for. So people who are new to diet and exercise, like I mentioned earlier, people who are married and have children, if you have a performance-oriented job, you should probably get adapted to this before going to work, okay? Because there is a period, just like if you try a low-carb diet, of adaptation that's required, okay? You're going to feel a little crappy for the first little bit. It goes away, and then it's actually awesome because you can go really long periods of time without eating, and it's no big deal. Like I said, I mean, I've gone 48 hours without barely noticing. I don't do it all the time. I think that'd be silly. But still, it's possible. Like, your head doesn't explode and you don't die and shrivel and stuff. If you have a client-facing job, you're going to have to figure out how this works. Because I've noticed there's a cognitive difference during your fasted and feeding times. When you're fasting itself, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, you seem to be able to have attention and focus on single tasks that's like laser-like. And that's why a lot of entrepreneurs love this type of thing and they champion it, because they're like, all right, cool, as long as people aren't bothering me and I don't have to talk to anyone right now, I can laser in on like my most important projects. And I've seen that. What it makes you really bad at is socializing and being in social environments. Creative, brainstorming, all of that sucks. No good, right? So you have to figure out how to structure your days around your life and understand these changes are going to happen. If you're going to compete in elite sport and athletics, really cautious, really cautious. Without a coach monitoring it, like I've been doing this a long time. And I actually had people looking after me too, because I'm not always the most objective about myself. You're going to need some help. Excessive lifestyle stressors, don't even take this on as another one, please. It's a mistake. And some women. It's not going to work in some women. Okay, so here's the deal. I've written a book on this topic, and it's totally free for you guys. It's called My Experiments with Intermittent Fasting. You can look at my blood work. You can look at every single workout program I did while I was doing the 6 months of fasting. You can look at every piece of food I ate, conclusions. I actually had Krista Scott-Dixon, who's on our team, who actually wrote subsections of the book from a woman's perspective, because Krista, again, like Aaron, had a really bad experience with fasting. In fact, the simplest way of putting it was it kind of kicked her into early menopause in her 30s. So not good stuff, okay? So she kind of talks about her experiences in it as well, and then we look over a lot of the data. If you guys want access to this, all you have to do is go to this URL, get.pn, so Precision Nutrition is our company, so get.pn/JB. That's it, get.pn/JB. You can do it on your smartphone right now, or you can write it down. If you go to that URL, all you have to do is put in your name and email address, and I'll mail you a copy of the book, and also a copy of this presentation, so you guys can have it and check it out whenever you like.